Florence Otaigbe is the lead immigration staff attorney for the Afghan Legal Assistance Program at Church World Service, Jersey City. Florence previously served as an immigration attorney at a private law firm in New York City, focused on handling a range of immigration cases, including but not limited to VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, family-based petitions, and 601, 601A waivers. Beyond the workplace, Florence continues her immigration advocacy as a member of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration's Black Migrant Ecosystem and co-chair of the immigration section for the National Conference of Black Lawyers. She is also a member of the National Lawyers Guild and the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and participates in several different subcommittees and interest groups. And Florence, you're welcome to tell us more about yourself and your work, but thank you so much for being here with us today for Know Your Rights.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie, for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here and share with you all some general Know Your Rights information about immigration. Like Stephanie said, I am an immigration attorney. I've been practicing immigration for almost 4 years now. I went to law school at CUNY Law in New York City, and I graduated in May 2020. Before that, I went to Michigan State University for college, and I majored in international relations. So that's a little bit more about me. I am originally from Mississippi, and I am the child of Nigerian immigrants. And for just a bit of a visual description, I am a Black woman. I have a smallish afro, and it's black hair, and I'm wearing glasses with rose tinted lenses and light blue frames. And we will get started now, and I'll get into the information of this presentation. Okay, so one thing before I get further into the information, everything I'm saying today is general legal information. I am not telling you anything specifically about your immigration situation or your status or any case you might have going on, but this is immigration information that you can use to better understand how things work in the United States with the immigration system. So to start, I wanted to give an overview of the US immigration system at large. There are two government agencies that cover the range of the immigration system. You have Department of Homeland Security, which includes 3 different agencies underneath that department. First, you have United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, commonly known as USCIS, which is the agency that handles the processing of immigration applications for various immigration benefits. You have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is commonly known as ICE or ICE. And this is the agency that is charged with enforcing immigration enforcement. And so these officials are at the border, these officials are in communities, and they are the ones who might be involved with detaining people and taking them into immigration custody. Then you have Customs and Border Protection, also known as CBP, which is the agency that is involved mostly with people's entry into the United States. So they are responsible for border patrol agents at the border, and they also are involved at various ports of entry at airports, um, at border crossings, like, the Canadian border, or at seaports, things like that, to process entries into the United States. And then a separate agency is Department of Justice, which goes beyond immigration, but it includes the Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is actually responsible for all the immigration courts in the United States. It is known as EOIR. And so this agency governs all the work of the immigration courts and is housed under the Department of Justice. So now that we have this context for the US immigration system, I am going to start talking about some of the potential immigration benefits that are available. Now, the main immigration benefit that most people know about, because it is commonly talked about, not only in the news, our communities, but also globally, is asylum. I want to first say that asylum is an international right. Everybody has the right to seek asylum, not just in the United States, but around the world. It is something that has been identified as a right by the United Nations and other international organizations. And the United States has taken that piece of international law and included it as part of United States law. So in terms of the United States law aspect, these are some of the requirements. You have to meet the definition of a refugee. And the definition of a refugee, which I'm realizing now I did not include this slide, so my apologies. The definition of a refugee is somebody who has a fear of persecution from somebody in their home country or their country of last residence based on a few different protected grounds, which include race, nationality, religion, membership in a particular social group, and political opinion. And they could also have a well-founded fear of this persecution, and they cannot find safety anywhere else in their country because of this persecution that they've already experienced or the fear of the persecution. And so with asylum, they have to meet that definition, and then they have to be in the United States when they are applying for asylum. And they must apply for asylum within 1 year of arrival into the United States. Technically, applications can be submitted 1 year after, or can be submitted after the 1 year filing deadline, but there has to be an explanation for the delay to avoid issues with your case. And there are certain exceptions within the law that qualify as an explanation for these delays. And so just to give a couple of examples, one exception could be that when you first arrived in the United States, things in your country weren't the best for you based on one of the protected grounds, but after a couple of years, maybe there was a new law that was implemented that meant if you were ever to return to your country, you would face persecution because of that law. And so that could mean you could then file for asylum potentially because of that changed circumstance. And another possible exception is that maybe there was something that made it difficult for you to apply for asylum within the 1 year, such as maybe you were hospitalized or you didn't have access to legal assistance, you didn't know you could apply for asylum, things like that. But at the end of the day, it is really important to apply within the 1 year because these exceptions are not guaranteed. So with asylum, there are actually two different asylum procedures. There is the affirmative asylum process, and then there's the defensive the defensive asylum process. The affirmative asylum process is what happens when you have not received what's called a notice to appear, which tells you that you are going to have a court date. When you have not received this notice to appear, you are able to go ahead and submit your asylum application, which is known as the I-589, to USCIS. And then after you submit your asylum application with all the required documents and all your evidence, you wait for an asylum interview to be scheduled at the asylum office. And there are a few different asylum offices in the United States, but they are not in every state. So sometimes you might have to travel to get to the asylum office. So you have to keep that in mind. Then you complete the asylum interview before a USCIS trained asylum officer. The interview is not meant to be adversarial. It's supposed to be the officer getting more information from you and hearing about your experience and understand why you have an asylum claim. So that's your opportunity to tell them more about what has happened to you. It can be very challenging to go through the interview process because it can be several hours, but this is the best opportunity you have to tell the officer as much as possible so they have all the details. After the interview, you wait for the asylum office to make a decision on your application. And then once they've made a decision, you are eligible to apply for a green card after you've had asylum status for 1 year. If your case is denied, it can possibly be referred to immigration court. But even though it's referred to immigration court, you are able to make a case for asylum again, but this time it would be before an immigration court judge. Now, if you receive a notice to appear after you've arrived in the United States that tells you you're going to have a court hearing, that means that you have to start the process applying for asylum in court. So the first step is the master calendar hearing, which is when you would let them know that you want to apply for asylum as a form of relief. And then you would also make sure to submit your asylum application to the judge. And it's the same asylum application. Then After you've submitted the asylum application, you have to wait for the full individual hearing to go before the judge and present your case. This is a different process from the interview because there's going to be an attorney on the government side who is trying to make the case that you should not be getting asylum because you quote unquote broke immigration law by crossing the border, let's say. So the standard is higher for defensive asylum, but it's still possible. At the end of the day, with either process, even though you can do it on your own, ideally you do want legal assistance. And something that's important to know is that legal assistance doesn't always mean you have to get a full attorney to represent you from beginning to end. A lot of organizations provide assistance to potential clients with supporting them on their applications, even if they can't provide an attorney. So that's always a good option too, because at least you know you're getting proper assistance with things being done correctly, and you can ask questions and get advice that way and still feel confident in what you're doing, even if you might not have somebody representing you at that time. So the next thing I want to go over is work authorization. There are a few different ways to apply for work authorization that I want to go over. This does not cover everything, but these are the main ways that are most known to folks, I would say. The first way is connected to asylum. Once you filed an asylum application, you're eligible to apply for work authorization after 150 days. And the work permit or the employment authorization document can be issued after 180 days. And then you also get a work permit once you are granted asylum. Another way is that some people come into the United States with what's called parole. This is something that is more common as the current administration has created a lot of parole programs. So some of those programs allow people to have work authorization. And the employment authorization document is valid during the time of the parole status. Finally, there are certain applications that when you file them, you're able to also apply for work authorization while it's pending. So for example, if you have a pending green card application, you can have an employment authorization document issued to you. Okay, so I know there's a lot of text on this slide. This is more so just so when you have the slides, you can have the information. But this covers how you can have a path to a green card based on family petitions. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this does get a little complicated and it really does depend on a case-by-case basis. But overall, I do want to make known that marriage is not the only way to get a green card through family. That is the most common way that's talked about, but there are other ways. The only thing is that the law is very limited to these specific family relationships. If it's outside of these family relationships, it cannot happen. So if you're the spouse of a US citizen, your spouse can apply. Your spouse can petition for you. If someone is the unmarried child who is under the age of 21 of a US citizen, the US citizen can petition for that child. If um if you're the parent of a US citizen who is at least 21, you can petition for that person. And with those cases, they are able to adjust status. And what the phrase adjust status means is that you can do the whole process beginning to end here in the United States. You don't have to wait for a visa to be available. Everything is ready to go. So that is a very specific process. Now, the other side of things are what are known as family preference categories, which is this longer list. And basically, with these categories, you have to wait until a visa is available before filing the green card application. But you can file the I-130 petition, which is the family petition, without waiting for the visa to be available. And with these categories, it gets more specific. And as each category goes down the list, the wait time gets longer. So, for example, this last category, brothers and sisters of US citizens, if the US citizen is 21 years of age and older, right now, it is about like a 15-year wait for that category. So while it's possible to apply for siblings, it is an extremely long wait time. And that's just the unfortunate reality of things right now. But it's not impossible. So it's just good to know that that's an option. So the other important thing to know about the family-based pathway to a green card is that some of the time when you're not able to adjust status, you are most likely going to have to do what's known as consular processing, which is when you would have to technically go back to your country of origin to do the consular processing and then technically come back, which gets super complicated. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too many details about it because a lot of times people may have been here for a really long time, undocumented, so that creates some complexities to the situation. Or some people just might not want to go back to their country of origin at all. So that's where working with an attorney is extremely important because that takes a lot of navigating and figuring out the situation. But I did want to take some time to at least acknowledge this because a lot of people want to know, like, how can my family help me get a green card? So I wanted to make sure I touched on this. Okay. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about immigration court. So earlier I mentioned the notice to appear. So this is an example of what the notice to appear looks like. There's a lot of information on it, but at the bottom, it should have the court information and it should either have the hearing date or it should say that a date is going to be set. That's really important. If information is missing, you should make note of that on your notice to appear, and you should let them know whenever you do get your hearing date that information is missing, things don't look correct, so they can take a further look at it. but this is what it looks like. And if you have this document, this means that your case is connected to immigration court. A huge part of any immigration process, whether you're working with USCIS or whether you're in immigration court, is making sure to keep your address up to date. So with immigration court, this is an example of the online portal where you can change your address. They also have a form you can print out and fill out and send in the mail. But this is just an example. Anytime you move, it is so important to fill out the form, change your address. Like, even if you move from one house right here to the other house right here, change your address, because they always send things in the mail. They're not going to email you, they're not going to call you. And if you don't have your address up to date with the immigration agencies, you could miss very important information. And if you miss important information, it can directly impact your case. So if you take away anything from this, make sure to always keep your address up to date. Okay. When it comes to immigration court, there's a way to get quick updates on your case status. This is an example of the way to check it online. You enter what's called your A number, which is basically like your immigration ID number. It starts with an A, and you would see it on all your immigration paperwork. So you enter your number in here, and you would also be able to see your court date information, the name of the judge, the phone number for the court, and things like that. So you can always check to see if anything has changed. There's also a phone number. There's also a 1-800 number you can call to get updates, but it really is kind of easier, if I'm being honest, to use this portal, because sometimes the phone system can be tricky, and it can sometimes be difficult to use the automated touch tone system. I think that's what they call it. But that is an option if using phone is preferred. Okay, I talked about this a little bit already, but for immigration court, you will have a few different hearings. You'll have what's called the master calendar hearing, which is the first hearing that you'll do. It typically only lasts a few minutes. They'll be looking to get information from you, confirm your information, ask if you're seeking any relief, if you have a lawyer. And sometimes they might do more than one master calendar hearing. Either way, it's important that you show up to all of them. The reason why it's very important that you show up is because they do have the ability to continue a hearing in your absence. And if they continue the hearing in your absence, they can make decisions without you there. So that's a risk you don't want to take. So if you're ever unable to make a hearing for whatever reason when you get the date, you should make sure to reach out to the court and notify them that you can't make it. Are we at a break, Stephanie?
I think so.
Okay.
Are we feeling good about this slide?
I had a couple more things, but I can pause.
Please finish the slide out, and then we'll move to a break.
Okay, cool. So make sure to notify the court if you ever can't make a hearing. You don't want to ever be a no-show for a hearing. And then once it's time for your individual hearing, like I said earlier, that's where they will hear the full case, review all the evidence, take your testimony, you'll be questioned, and after that, the judge will make a decision. So again, you could have multiple hearings throughout the whole process. They could also be scheduled months and sometimes years apart. And there also might be requests for you to send things in and submit things in between hearings. Like I said, they send everything in the mail, which is why it's very important to keep your address up to date. So we are moving along. The next part I want to touch on is something I honestly love telling people about, because a lot of people just don't know about it, and I always just feel like this is something that everybody should know. I'm going to talk about requesting your immigration record. It is something that is very important if you are in a position where you know you've had interactions with any of the agencies I mentioned earlier, but you don't have copies of your documents, or if you know maybe your mom had an immigration history and you're trying to understand what that might mean for you and you want to get copies of her records or something like that. There's so many scenarios where requesting immigration records could be helpful. And so that's why I'm going to share a little bit about that. First of all, the Freedom of Information Act, which is commonly known as FOIA or FOIA, is a law that was passed, I don't even know when, long time ago. But it gives people the right to request records from, I think, most government agencies and public institutions. So in the immigration context, it allows you to request your records from USCIS, CBP, and ICE, amongst others, but those are the ones I just want to focus on now. Oh, and immigration court, of course. Sorry. So on the slides, I included the links to where you can go and request them. They all now have online portals where you can create an account and set it up to make your request. However, they still do have other ways for requesting them. They all have forms you can print out and send in the mail, but usually they respond the quickest through their portals. Now, you might be wondering, what is the benefit of this? So, the benefit is that if you don't have copies of some of your paperwork, or you want to know more about what happened, or you just generally would like to see your immigration record, it's good to do. The other thing is that a lot of times, as attorneys, before we start a case, we want to see somebody's immigration record in order to be able to figure things out and determine how to move forward. So if you already have your records, it honestly makes things easier for us, if I'm going to be honest. So it also helps you in that way if you have more of your records when you go to consult with an attorney. And so even if it's just for that purpose, that is a good thing as well. So I highly recommend considering this depending on your situation. I'm not saying everybody needs to go and start requesting FOIAs. It's not really necessary if you don't need to, but it's available if you might find it useful. I do want to note though, if you have not had connections to any of these agencies, you're most likely not going to have records. So I would not submit anything. That is not recommended. This is for people who know that they've submitted previous applications with USCIS and they want copies of what was submitted and what happened, or you have had a court case in the past maybe and you don't remember what happened, something like that, or you have had to be doing ICE check-ins and things like that, and you're not really sure what your record with ICE has been since maybe you first got to the US and maybe you were detained, something like that. But again, if you haven't had any interactions with any of these agencies, this is not something you need to do because you're not going to have a record. And another thing to consider is that sometimes they will respond saying they might not have anything, or they might send it back with parts missing or redacted. And that doesn't mean anything's wrong. That doesn't mean they're like hiding something or there's an issue. That they actually have the right to um, redact parts of it, and sometimes they also might not have certain things. So just heads up about that, because I wouldn't want to tell you all to go request all of these things and then you request them and then you don't get anything back. Okay, so the next thing I want to go over is the I-94 document. This document is a record of your entry into the United States. So this applies to people who enter the United States with a visa, parole, or some other form of an immigration document. And you should have an I-94 with you, or on your or amongst your documents already. But in the case that you don't, you are able to get a copy of it online, and I've included the link here. The reason why it's good to have a copy of your I-94 is this is a document that can show proof of your entry. And if you don't have a copy of it for whatever reason, you're able to go online, access it, and then you can, screenshot it on your phone. You can print it, whatever the case might be, so you have that record. And it can be helpful in various scenarios if anyone needs to see proof of that. I'll also note that there is an app called CBP1, and people can also access their I-94 on that app. But I actually recommend using this website over the app, but I just wanted to mention the app as well, just so people know. Oh, that's going back. Okay, so the last little bit of the presentation is going to touch on more of the traditional know your rights aspect. So talking about handling encounters with law enforcement and what to do if you do possibly get detained by ICE and things like that. So I do just want to say that this information might be a little bit more sensitive, and if you need to pause here if you're watching the recording, or if you're live, if you need to just step away for a second, feel free to do so. But just know that I am going to be describing this with a good bit of detail, just so I can make this information as clear as possible. All right, so I first want to go over what to do if ICE shows up where you are. So first, I want to go over what to do if they show up at your home. So let's say you're at home, regular day, you get a knock on the door, and you ask who it is, and they say ICE, or they before you even ask who it is, they say it's ICE, open up. You don't have to open up the door. You don't have to let them in. You can ask for more details about who they are, or to show their ID from behind the door. But more importantly than all of that, you should ask if they have a judicial warrant. They cannot just come to your house and show up and try to come in and talk to you or take you away without a warrant. So that is the most important thing to ask, is if they have a judicial warrant. But sometimes you might not remember to ask that off the top of your head. So it might be easier to just remember to ask, like, ID, who are you really? I need more information. I don't have to let you in, saying things like that. But there could be a situation where they might just enter anyway. They might do a forceful entry. And in the case of that happening, you should make sure that you emphasize you do not consent to them being in your home. And if they start looking around in your stuff, searching through your things, or if they start trying to search your person, make sure you also make it clear that you do not consent to them searching. It is very important for you to vocalize those things, because it'll be very clear, especially if they have body cameras, or there's witnesses, that you were not okay with any of that happening. And you do have the right to do all of these things. So it's important that you can say and do these things, and you should do them as well. So the next scenario is if you're maybe outside in public, like just, outside on the street, or you're maybe walking in a store, or maybe you're in the park. So if they come up to you and you see maybe on their vests or something that it says ICE, just start off by just asking, can I go? Like, don't say anything, don't engage in conversation. And if they say, yes, you can go, just say, all right, I'm going and I'm not saying anything. Like, just be super direct and just walk away. Like, it's okay, just walk away. And if they say, no, you can't go, don't ask, okay, why are you here? What did I do? Things like that. Just say, I wish to remain silent. And like I said before, with the searching the home, if they start trying to search you, like see if you have something on your person, make it clear that you don't consent to them searching. It's the same thing. Like, making it clear that you are not allowing them to do what they're doing. And you can also mention, you know, I I want to speak to an attorney. You know, you can always throw that in there too. Like, because again, they should not be doing that. They should not be searching you. Okay. So the next scenario is if they're at your job, or if they're at your or if they're maybe at your school, or if they're just in a school and you happen to be at the school. So technically, they can enter a workplace, they can enter a school without a warrant. But if it's a workplace, but you're in like your office or you're in your boss's office or something like that, they can't then enter that private space without permission. So it's really important that you like, if you see them or you hear that they're around or something, let somebody know, like, don't let them in here, they can't come in here, things like that. And if they still somehow find their way in and you're approached directly, you do not have to answer their questions. It's the same thing. They start searching. You do not consent. Let them know you do not consent. And I know in all of these scenarios, it's like you still kind of have to engage to some degree, and you might be wondering, like, why do I have to stay in the situation? The thing is, it's mostly, you don't want to escalate things because ICE can get really aggressive. But at the same time, like I've said multiple times, you do have rights and you can enforce them, right? And so it's better for you to just try to stay in the situation neutrally, enforce your rights, than for you to try to fight back or to run away or something like that. Because honestly, if you push with your rights enough, they will likely leave. Because a lot of what they do is to intimidate. And a lot of times they don't have a right to be doing what they're doing. Now, if they have a warrant, that's a different story. But a lot of the times when they are randomly showing up and doing these types of things, it's not warranted, you know. So that's why it's really important to know what to do in these situations so that you can get out of them quicker. Okay, so the other side of law enforcement is the police, and then the criminal court system. So when it comes to this side of things, always know you have the right to speak to an attorney. And the crucial part to understand is that you should make it clear that you wish to speak to an attorney. So you should say, I want to speak to a lawyer. I want to speak to an attorney. Don't say, I think I want to speak to an attorney, or can I speak to an attorney? Just say, I want to speak to an attorney. I want to speak to a lawyer. The reason I'm saying that is because even if you're saying, I think I want to speak to an attorney, and we know you're saying, I want to speak to an attorney, they could still say, oh, well, maybe they weren't sure or something like that. I know it sounds messed up, but that is just unfortunately how the law has sometimes worked. But the clearer you are, the better it is, because then it's like clear cut. No one can say there was a question about whether or not you wanted to speak to an attorney. You can also say you wish to remain silent. But the bottom line is you do not have to engage and interact with them without an attorney present, and you also don't have to, generally speaking. So in the case of the crossover between, you know, possibly being arrested and then knowing that it could possibly affect your immigration status, if this happens and you're being questioned by police and they are suspecting that you may not have quote unquote papers, as that's something common that happens. Show me your papers. You do not have to answer them. You do not have to do anything. You don't have to show anything. You don't have to answer questions about your immigration status, and you should not answer questions about your immigration status. So that's important to keep in mind. And then if for whatever reason things get to the point where you are charged with something, or it goes even beyond that and it seems like they're going to offer you a plea deal of some sort, make sure you make it known that you want to know the immigration consequences of these matters. And this goes for if you're in a situation by yourself, if you're assigned a public defender, if you pay for a defense attorney, make sure you ask about the immigration consequences, because there could be some. And it's very important that you know and understand what they might be before you make any type of decision. So I do want to emphasize that. Okay. So next, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what to do if you do happen to be detained by ICE. So when when you're detained by ICE, there's the usual important stuff of, you still have a right to ask for an attorney. Make sure you request interpretation if you need it so that you understand everything that's going on. But also, because a lot of times people have families, people might be caregivers, people, might just have loved ones that they want to know what might happen in case this happens. It's actually pretty helpful to try to plan ahead of time if you can. It might be hard to think about because you don't want to imagine a situation where this would happen, but it's ideal because if it were to happen, there would be things in place so that you would know your loved ones, your children, the person you're caring for, whoever are taken care of in the case that you're not there. So this is something that has become more common in terms of working with the immigrant community, in terms of, making a sort of a plan. So this could include, having somebody who you designate as like your point of contact. Like if I'm detained, I'm going to call you. I'm going to call you and I'm going to give you the updates. I'm going to give you the information. And then you let all the people you want to know, hey, this is the person that I'm going to be calling. And then that way everybody can know that this person is going to have the information. You can make a plan so that your children know, hey, if this happens, this is whose house you should go to, and go stay with them, and then that person knows they're going to be caring for your children. And or if you have a family member you're caring for, make sure that there's a plan or option in place so that they are able to continue getting the care they need if that happens, things like that. But you should also plan for yourself. So, if that means having a medication list ready so that when you do get so then when it does happen, you're able to let ICE officers know, like, hey, these are my medications that I need. Like, I gotta have these. These are the treatments I need. I gotta have these. Like, you'll be ready for that. If there is somebody who could be your attorney if that happens, like, have the number, know the number, have it written somewhere. Like, take these types of steps so that when this happens, you don't feel like you don't have a plan, if that makes sense. And there are some resources that I sent over that I think will be circulated, so you'll be able to look through these and kind of get an idea for some of the plans you could try to make, if you feel like that might be helpful for you. But of course, we don't want this to happen, but it's just good to kind of know in the case that it does, so that everyone you care about is going to be okay, and you also know that you'll be okay in that situation as well. And so, like I was saying, you still say you want a lawyer. You don't have to answer questions or sign anything without one. You have the right to ask for an interpreter, and you should. And I didn't mention this in the court part, but you should also do that in regards to that as well. It's very important that you understand everything that is happening. And then, like I said, let ICE know if you have medical needs. You're able to make phone calls like right after. And so this is where the point of contact piece can help. So that way you can, like I said, let them know what's happening, and then that way everybody could know, like, to go to this person and get updates and information. That way you don't feel like you have to call a bunch of people and things like that. That's just a suggestion, but you can always come up with your own plan that works for you and your situation. But those are just some of the things to think about. Whew, I know that was a lot, but that is everything. Um, Again, this is by no means the full spectrum of immigration. I tried to cover different aspects, and I hope it was helpful. And yeah, I mean, I think there'll be a way to ask me questions, hopefully after the fact, because I know a lot of you will be watching this recording. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so, so much, Florence, for your expertise, for all of the things that you chose to share, for the incredible amount of intelligence and discernment that it took to share these incredibly important pieces in support and protection of our immigrant siblings, with the full knowledge that borders are not real and that we are
That
on stolen
part.
land.
Yep.
So to our siblings who are dealing with and embroiled in this process, we love you. We appreciate you. We are here for you. If you have questions for Florence, if you're watching this via our YouTube page, you can email us and we will get the question to Florence at community, COMMUNITY, community at the Uprise Collective, THEUPRISECOLLECTIVE.org. O-R-G. The email address is community@theuprisecollective.org. We're going to pause the recording now. And if you have a question for our Q&A, please feel free to add it and we will spend some more time together. But in the meantime, we'll pause our broadcast now and move toward the end of our time together. Thank you to our ASL interpreter. Thank you to our captioner. And thank you to our interpreters in Spanish and Mandarin and Somali. Thank you for being with us today.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.